everybody. Nothing like starting out with a little technical difficulty today. Welcome back to Tech Backstage. I'm Tulio Sirgusa, broadcasting from Southern California. And joining me today is Colby Tunick, who is the CEO at ReFocus AI, just a little south of me here in San Diego. Nice to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Tulio. Excited to be here.
Great. We're talking about design thinking today again, and we're asking this question: what is data? And a world beyond noise and numbers. That's what we're going to talk about today. Everybody always thinks data is about numbers, right? But is it about people, really? That's what we're going to talk about as we go through a few questions in our design thinking show segment. But let's get to know Colby a little bit. Colby, if you could introduce yourself, tell us about who you are and what you're doing now. Appreciate having you on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that introduction, and very excited to talk about design thinking as it relates to data. I think we too often forget that humans are what comprise our data points, and putting the human back into data helps us drive profitability and revenue for companies that are able to do just that. So, as I was introduced, my name is Colby Tunick. I'm the CEO of ReFocus AI. We, right now, primarily help insurance companies pinpoint who are their customers that are most likely to leave at the renewal or expiration date, helping them recapture 25% of the revenue that they would otherwise lose from people who churn. So that's what we do. And as you might be able to tell, we use a lot of data in that, which is why I'm super excited for this topic here today, Tulio.
Great. Looking forward to seeing how you guys got there, how you designed all this. And I love this concept of it's all about people, including the data. So let's get started with our question, the first question today, and it'll kick off our conversation. How do you guys engage people to gain a deeper understanding of problems you're solving to drive innovation opportunities? So how do you turn the data back to the people? Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So our customers' data is 100% people dependent, and the insights we provide back to those customers are also 100% dependent on their customers. And so what we actually do is help them understand what their customers are going to do next. And we can't do that without an understanding of how the data relates to the people themselves. And so when we engage people to get a deeper understanding of the problems they're trying to solve, we always start with an open-ended question. And that open-ended question is, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it in any way, given, shape or form, what would you do with it? And most of the time, what it comes down to is using their data to help them better serve their population of customers. And I reference population because every company has a certain demographic, a geography, product that they sell, and most companies differentiate themselves in that way. And so by understanding where their needs are and how they see their needs of their customers being solved, we're really able to come in. And where we have found a lot of success at ReFocus AI is specifically in helping reduce churn. So churn is this idea that you spend a lot of money on customer acquisition, you got to bring them on the door, you got to keep them happy, but a certain amount of customers are going to leave every year regardless of what companies do. So we help them pinpoint and focus in on the people that are likely to stay given certain retention actions that are taken by them, the company, to better serve their population.
So how do you get to engaging people to understand that that's what they need? Like, how do you guys validate that? How did that come to be informed on how you shaped your product?
Sure. So there's a lot of conversations that you have to have in any industry to understand what their problems are. And before the show, we were talking a little bit about the lean cabins, and that was something that I was introduced to. There's a company out there called Strategizer that puts out a lot of free templates that are around this topic that I was introduced to at the first startup I worked at. And really what it comes down to is once you've identified the customer archetype that you're trying to help, really understanding what their biggest pain points are. And you can't do that by just talking to 1, 2, 3, 10 customers. It really takes talking to hundreds of customers over a fixed time period and understanding where they see themselves needing help and understanding, more importantly, why they can't solve it today themselves. Because most people are pretty resourceful, and most people, if there is a solution that they can implement themselves, are the first people to do it. And so, through that process of customer discovery and really diving into their pain points, we're able to then validate what it is that we do and understand where we provide the most value to them.
Nice. Strategize is a great tool developed by a fellow Swiss born strategist. Alex, good job there. So let's continue on with the next question because ultimately, in order to extract those values and talk to hundreds of customers, sometimes even more than that, you need people to collaborate together. So the next question is, what challenges have you had to overcome to increase collaboration amongst employees, and what has been the impact on innovation as it relates to that?
Sure. So I think before anyone sets off on a journey of innovation, the first thing they have to realize is most people are not themselves innovative.
Mm,
And so let's say you're talking to 100 people, 80% of those people are probably not going to be the ones that give you the data that you need to build a company or validate an idea or prove product market fit. And so I always go back to Crossing the Chasm. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, 100% recommend it. And they always talk about trying to find your visionaries at first, right? You find your visionaries, and once you've established the product market fit, the problem statement with the visionaries, you then make the leap to the early adopters, right? And so it's that identification of who is really innovative. And there's a couple of ways to do that. They're all conversational based. One is through just life experience. If you talk to enough innovators versus early majority or late majority, you eventually get a feel for who is actually giving you actionable information. The second way to do it is more of a data-driven approach, and that's trying to come up with objective scoring mechanisms to rate the feedback you're getting in order to try and quantify what information you're being told and then assign a value to it. And we have a rule internally where if we hear something 3 or more times from 3 different people in 3 different conversations, then we start paying attention to it. And that has really helped us focus in on actual customer problems and kind of bridge some of that gap when it comes to being innovative with a lot of these legacy companies.
nice. You've covered two amazing design thinking tools: Strategizer and a lot of lean canvas based on the Crossing the Chasm lean startup methodology. One great book along those lines I'd like to recommend. It was actually written by Bruce Cleveland, who was a managing partner at Wildcat Ventures. It's called Traversing the Traction Gap. So for those watching, that's another great book that's similar to Crossing the Chasm that really talks to how to effectively do that, traversing that traction gap. So let's continue on to question number 3. Now, you get people to work together, they're getting all this information from everyone. How do you get them to synthesize all the learnings to inform the prototype solution to the problems that need to be solved? I mean, it's great collecting this information, but ultimately you have to put it into some kind of a prototype that can be validated and tested in real life. So how do you guys go about synthesizing all that information, massive amounts of information, distill it down to something that's palatable? How do you guys do that?
Mm-hmm. So, ultimately people are the best data, and sometimes it's the non-obvious cues that give you the most validation into how they're actually receiving what they're being shown. And there's this concept that exists, and there's a very valid debate about it, but it's fail hard, fail fast, right? It was kind of popularized by Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, and the idea being you come up with an idea, you validate it really quick, or you kill it. Google is very good at that too. They do that all the time with some of their innovative technology approaches. Ultimately, though, through hard knocks and experience, what I have found to be the best way to validate a solution is to spend as little time building it and the most time faking it. And so
Okay,
oftentimes,
hang on. Just repeat that again, because that's like a little quotable mention there. Do what again?
spend the least amount of time making it and the most amount of time faking it.
Okay, you got
Uh,
to go a little deeper on that one.
I'm going to go deeper into that. So the worst mistake that any company can make is have an idea and then sink time and resources into building a product they think solved the problem. And so that's the making it approach. That's the we think we have this great idea. We have this insight into the market that no one else has. We're operators that can execute on this. Let's go and build it. And I've seen many, many talented founders go down that rabbit hole and fail miserably because they spend all of their initial capital building something that turns out to be, if not completely wrong, at least, inconclusive or not entirely right.
Right.
And so
They made a decision on a hypothesis that hadn't been proven yet.
absolutely. And so that's why I said spend the most amount of time faking it. So there are a lot of great ways you can get feedback on prototypes without actually having a functioning anything, a physical product, a
Mm.
virtual product, a web application. Um, and so the best way to get customer feedback is to spend as little time building it as possible and the most time showing it to customers, right? And so, before somebody goes out there and they spend time hiring developers or engineers to 3D print a physical product or design a web or mobile application, they really should be starting with wireframes or 3D interactive sketches or things that allow you to gather the same amount of feedback, but without the entire technical requirement, heavy lifting that comes with actually making a product. And so that's why I was saying, if you can fake it, that's the best way to gather feedback on a prototype quickly, succinctly, without spending any time on it. And the best part of that ultimately is that when it comes to the skills match of founders, most founders tend to find themselves less in the technical space and more in the execution space, which means that they're going and they're paying people to actually build or make this product for them that they then use as a prototype to show off. And with the tools that exist today, for faking it or likely prototyping to get quick iterative feedback, any individual, even if they're not technical, can get their hands busy and build that quickly, show something in the market, get more feedback, iterate off of it, and ultimately quickly identify if their thesis is right or wrong.
So we touch a little bit on the next question here, which is great. I just want to go a little deeper, if we could, before you actually go into prototyping. You've got all this information coming across various people. How do you decide which one of those to act on? Is there a process you guys have mastered on figuring out which of this is valid or worthwhile pursuing? How do you guys synthesize and figure that out? Just curious to go a little deeper on that part of it, if you could.
Sure, that's a fair question. Ultimately, um, after working at ReFocus for over 2 years, there's kind of two lessons that I've learned that I might get tattooed on my forehead for the next startup. And the first one is don't start a product or don't start a company if you don't know the first person you're going to sell it to. And when I say
Hmm.
know the first person you're going to sell it to, I mean pick up the phone, call them, and ask for a check. Um, that in and of itself is probably the most lesson of hard knock that I've learned. And within that, right, the second lesson is at least having 5 years of experience, not just with the technology or the product you plan on building, but in the specific industry or consumer segment you plan on selling it to. So you shouldn't sell baby food if you've never worked in the baby food space, right? You're probably not going to be very successful. And if you don't have the first customer essentially on speed dial who will write you a check when you ask, you know, go back, spend some more time working on the idea, spend some more time speaking with people. In terms of knowing when, out of prototypes or ideas or theses, you've settled on something that's actually a good business idea, that to me comes back again to the rule of three. And so I'm not going to say it works for everyone, but if three people unsolicited provide the same feedback, and this is where asking open-ended and not leading questions come in, then it's a good idea. Then it's something that there's some merit that you can explore further and continually refine. And it's important to establish a relationship with those people so you can go back with them in the future and ask them if you're still on the right track. And so, oftentimes you'll hear founders talk about, or people who started a company say, we set a goal to speak to 50 people in 30 days. And we asked them about our idea. We showed them our prototype. It was great. And then you ask, well, did you ever go back to those 50 people? And they're like, no, we were busy. We started selling. And I was like, well, A, why did you talk to those people if they weren't going to turn into customers? And B, if their feedback to you was significant enough that you took the link to start a company, then you should want their feedback on whatever the current iteration or development of your product looks like. And so those would be my tricks for kind of validating the prototype, if you will.
That is such a powerful thing you've shared. I'm going to venture to say that probably the companies who struggle the most to get investors are also those who don't have that set of customers on speed dial that are ready to write the check for what they're building. If it's that hard, you probably need to go back and figure out what you're doing, right? So we touched on this a little bit. Let's go on to question number 4. I'm curious to learn about what methodologies you use to build your prototype. You mentioned it a little bit, before you put something together, or 3D model or wireframe, etc. But how do you figure that out? Because it's different for different, it's a different outcome, a different approach for every problem, right? So have you guys sort of figured out how to think that through? If you could share that with us, that'd be great.
Sure. So when it comes to data, noise, and design-related thinking, you are your best customer, which is why I said earlier, if you don't at least have 5 years of experience in the industry you're selling a product into, you probably need to spend some more time in the industry, because with that experience comes an understanding of where you should start. Not where you end up, but where you start. And so if you have this great idea, but you've never worked in that industry, you either A, need to go find a co-founder who has, that can give you that expertise, or wait, ultimately. And so there's this concept that I've heard of, it's called eating your own dog food, consuming your own product. And this is both technical and non-technical. So if you're building a set of application program interfaces or APIs for third-party integrations, you should also be using those in your own internal application, right? So that's the technical application. The business development application of that is, if you're building a product to, say, build financial models, you should yourself be using that product internally to help you build your own financial models. Because if you yourself don't have the problem that you're trying to solve for, you're not going to start in the right space. And when it comes to design related thinking, when it comes to prototyping, when it comes to business development, what matters is where you start. You're not going to end up anywhere near where you start, right? And you're going to go in an entirely different direction. But if you start in the right place, you're probably not going to end up where you need to go. And so that's why using yourself is, therapists say, like, using themselves as their own therapist, right? It's like using yourself as your own ideal customer and understanding the problems that you have as that customer gives you a place to build a foundation to be successful for. And if you don't have that foundation, it's really, really difficult.
It's like that saying, you have to walk a mile in someone else's shoes to really understand what's going on. So if you're not in that space, it's going to be a lot more challenging. All right, let's move on to our final question here. And I want to preface this with the concept that one of the things that we talk about at the University of California on the design thinking program that I advise on is asking the 5 whys, asking why 5 levels deep. And by the time you ask the 5th why, it gets really annoying to people. Why are you asking me why again? But you really get to understand the real problem. So I'm curious, how do you go about validating your prototypes, testing them, iterating, and then to ultimately fine tuning them so you're solving the original problem? Mm-hmm. What is it in the final steps that you guys do to recheck to make sure, is this really does this really serve the need of the problem we're trying to solve? How do you guys do that?
Yeah. So, in the spirit of today's conversation, I think it's important to realize that most data out there is actually noise. Most data out there is not actually going to help you build a better product and validate it. And so the best indication you can get that you have found some semblance of product market fit is that you get a check, right? As soon as you get someone who hands you money, you then know that that's the ultimate product market.
That's the ultimate validation, right?
ultimate validation. But let's take a step back. Let's pretend that you're still early in your business development journey. When I say business development, I don't actually mean sales. I mean customer discovery.
Yeah.
So you're going through your customer discovery process. You're speaking to anyone you can get your hands on. The first thing you have to do is figure out of everyone you're speaking with, which feedback is noise and which is valid. And again, there's a couple ways to do this. You can, try and come up with a statistical model that you then rate each person's experience and seniority and, level of innovativeness, et cetera. And then based on that, like, is this feedback we listen to or not? You can also use life experience or your co-founder's life experience to help discern, does this person know what they're talking about? Are they actually going to lead us in the right direction? And that's because most people want the same thing. They just don't know how to articulate it. And if you let them articulate what they think they want, you'll build something they actually don't want and the market isn't ready for or isn't interested in the first place. And so the best way to validate a prototype of any sort or validate a business idea other than revenue is to understand, out of everyone you're speaking with, who are the right people to be listening to. And I've worked at companies where there were individuals that people were listening to that were giving bad feedback, right? The market was saying one thing and these trusted individuals were saying another. And sometimes it's hard to know, especially when you're in between, let's say, two customers, both of who are going to write you a check, who to listen to, who to satisfy, who has the pain point that's actually going to set you on the path to success and not end up building one-off products to solve one-off needs for one-off customers. And ultimately, I think, and this is something I'm not going to pretend like I haven't failed at this. I've definitely failed. I have definitely listened to the wrong people. I have definitely not quantified the feedback I was getting early on. And after you bloody your elbows a couple of times, it becomes pretty obvious. And I think people need to have flexibility and, lack of a better word, grace with themselves. Like, know you're going to fail. But what matters is that those relationships are open so you can go back to them. And if you can do that, you'll be successful.
What you just shared is so powerful. And I feel like we just had a mini masterclass on what to do and what not to do when you're building a product or you're doing a startup. You said something so powerful where a lot of companies, even matured companies, fail at this miserably. If you got two different types of customers with two different problems willing to write you a check, it's very tempting to take both. But one's going to take you down the path that's repeatable and scalable based on actually solving the problem that you've identified as a need that you could actually gain traction with. The other one might turn out to be a distraction. So the value you're getting from that upfront check might actually derail you from the focus and success you're going to have by picking the right buyer. So thanks for being with us today. I can see the value you guys have put into solving the problem for insurance companies. It's not about data. It's about help us keep the clients so that they renew, especially in transactions where it only happens like once a year. It's not a monthly kind of or daily kind of a relationship. So it becomes really critically important to get it right. And that's also big ideas that can be understood, right? Help me keep my customers. That's really what my problem is, keep my customers. Well, thanks for being with us, Colby. Really appreciate you spending time and sharing all these wonderful insights. Stay with us as we go off the air in just a second. Carlos, we've got 2 more design thinking shows this week. What do we got coming up tomorrow and finally on Friday? Please. Unmute.
Excuse me. Yeah. So absolutely, Tulio. You know that being on mute is my trademark, and I wouldn't feel happy if I weren't, ever. So tomorrow we're going to be speaking with Paul Shostak, the CEO of Open World Labs. And then finally on Friday, that's our last show of the week, which is also design thinking themed. And that will be with Robin Zander, the CEO of Zander Media. That's what we have right here on Tech Backstage. Thursday and Friday, join us at 11 o'clock Pacific time in the morning. And see you then.
Looking forward to it. I particularly want to call out tomorrow's show. It's about Web 3.0. If you're curious about what that is, come on in tomorrow. We'll talk about it. Have a good one. See you back again tomorrow. Be safe and have fun, everybody.